First things first, I just want to, first of all, welcome you here, and our friends online, thanks for tuning in as well today. I just want to give a shout out. Last week is like what our staff, what they go through for Easter weekend, and so many of you volunteering, is kind of like experiencing a minor car accident. Between all the logistics for Friday and all the things that we did on Sunday as well. Our band was here late on Thursday and early morning on Sunday. Many of you in guest services, double dipping for both services and pouring out in so many different ways. Kids ministry people, different services. So can we just make some noise for God working through you? Thank you so much. Obviously, we have a very talented group of people, not just the band. Our band is amazing, but so many of you that serve in different areas in the church, and we just want to say thank you. We know it's a lot. Maybe it's a taste of what's to come if we move to 2 services someday. I know our band is cringing already. I don't want to look at Reese right now. I feel the heat of his eyeballs looking at me as we dread that day, but it's probably coming at some point. Well, friends, really, we're diving into a new series. I'll kind of explain what it is here in a minute, but you all face in life, you face some sort of door. And a lot of you, maybe if you remember back to when you were in high school and the pressure that you had to pursue the right door. Because you remember back to that pressure being in high school, it's like, okay, now it's even more intense, going back to like middle school. You better have it figured out what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And there's this push and this tension over you better have this stuff figured out. And okay, here's 2,000 doors, pick a door. And maybe for some of you in life is you have the urge to merge, and you're looking for that special one to do life with, right? And you're like, well, there's a lot of options out there, like 3 billion plus of that gender to pick from. And life is just filled with picking a door. Maybe some of you now in life, as you're looking at a career change or just some other path in life, and you're trying to think, okay, God, which door do I pick? Which door do I walk through? And our worship pastor, Reese, he tries to keep me in the loop with culture because I have kids and I like carpentry, so I'm not cool at all. And there's this social media thing that's mainly on TikTok now. It's like, okay, are there more doors on earth or wheels? And there's this huge debate. Well, of course, there's more cars. Well, they have just about as many doors as wheels, counting the spare. And so he's filling me in on this rub. It's like this big thing on TikTok now is going out there. So we're all trying to talk about and figure out, well, doors, well, how many doors and wheels? And everybody's talking about doors. I'm not on TikTok. I don't even know what it is, but I try to talk about it to try to be cool, but I'm not. But I do believe that when we get so preoccupied looking at all these different options in life of different doors, we cannot forget that there is one door that is the most important door. Coulter knows what I'm talking about today. We're going to go into it. I have been looking forward to this series for 2.5 months. This is based on, I'm not sponsored by them, but I'm going to talk about this a lot in the next 7 weeks, is the ARC experience up in Kentucky. When you go to the ARC experience, when you go, and it's not just for parents with little kids, I mean, it's for all ages, you will love it. Well, I went through with my parents came here to visit from Oregon. We took our Estrogen Empire, went up there, went to the ARC experience. I think the high for that weekend was like 32.5 degrees. So I want to go back in a different circumstances. But you get a walk through. They built this giant ark, like supposed to be like how the size of the actual ark was. I remember walking through the exhibit, all these different floors are taking you through what it was like back then. You get to touch things and sense all the stuff that was going on. You get to walk through this exhibit. They brought out a python. So it kind of brings you into that world. But my favorite part of the ARC experience, I know some of you have been there, is when you get to the end, it kind of wasn't a big part of the story, but they started talking about the door on the ark. And for me, this is when my world just kind of hit pause. And I just kind of, okay, I need to have a moment here. Because they had these lights reflecting on the door, kind of what was maybe to be the door of the ark. And it had all this imagery of there was just one door on the ark. There's a lot of symbolism in that for us today. That salvation was found through that one door of the ark. So maybe some of you remember the story of Noah and the flood and the ark. Maybe you haven't visited that in years. So we're going to walk through this story because I'm thinking this is the most powerful part of the story that I love so much. Because you fast forward to the New Testament, the book of John. There's a person, a man who calls himself the door, not a door. And his name is Jesus Christ. He is the door, the one way for salvation. And so now picturing all these different doors, we focus on all these things. We put all this time and energy into different doors and choices. We get stressed out. All these options. You look at your menu, you're stressed out, right? All these too many options today. Well, we're going to focus on really the one door. And in this story today, there is so much going on in this. I'll be honest. I did not have the 80 hours I needed to do the study into this week. This is one of the most debated parts of the entire scripture as far as square inch. The first 4 verses we're looking at today are so contested, debated on for centuries. And so in 30 minutes, I'm just going to whet your appetite and try to clear up what I can. But I do believe the one thing for us today is this: be the Noah the world needs. Because Kathy read it already. We went through all the mess and all these weird things we're talking about, angelic beings and procreation and weird things going on. But don't lose sight of the one thing: is be the Noah that the world needs. Because in the corruption that God was seeing at this time, he saw this one man who was righteous, this one man. And today, more than ever, as I look at our culture falling apart right on schedule, I think this is our time more than ever to go as Christ followers and to be the salt and to be the light and to show Jesus to the world. So friends, the challenge today is really to be like Noah. This series is called The Open Door. And friends, I just want to remind you, we haven't done this for a while, but every time you open this book, you have to imagine it's hot, it's hard to touch, it's smoking because it's a double-edged active sword. So when you open this, you have to turn on the AC. The A stands for? Author. Good. The C stands for? Context. Let's try that again. The A stands for? Author. It's good. C stands for? Context. You guys, it's great. It's okay. You do remember. So author in context. So we're going to the book of Genesis. And the book of Genesis is very complex, and there's so much in it. We're just looking at a few chapters in this series. But the author, we believe, is Moses. And the context is he's just kind of saying, well, these are the origins. This is how it all started. This is the beginning, is what the book of Genesis is about. And a lot of people, when they want to open the Bible, and so they start in Genesis. You can do that, but sometimes it helps to get some understanding of what's going on in this book, because it can be very confusing. And so we're going to be in chapters 6, 7, and 8 for this series. But just give you kind of a timeline of where we are. So we have creation. He made things all, it was good. Everything was good. He had the pinnacle of the family structure. He had one man and one woman. This beautiful image of, now we say, the visible image of the gospel in that relationship. And then man had a choice, and man chose pride, and he pursued this, and they went to the wrong fruit and did all these things to get the eyes of God and to kind of be like him. They fell at that point. And then from there, we had the consequences of sin now that we still live in today. But in this season between the fall and where we are now in this story, there was a lot of fertility. And so we know when there are a lot of sinners who are born, we have much more sin in the world. That's usually how it works. And so now civilizations are being created over these years, and now there's even more sin and corruption, and bad things are going on. So we enter into the text in Genesis chapter 6. We're going to be in verses 1 through 8 today. And I tell you, these first 4 verses gave me a lot of wrestles this week in my conversations with God, because I was pumped about this series. I'm like, I could have just skipped these first 4 verses and just started with maybe verse 5. But no, I do believe this is in here for a reason. So friends, we're going to go right into verse number 1 in chapter 6. It says this: when human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them that they chose. So we weren't just having daughters born. There were also sons born as well. It usually takes sons and daughters to be born to start babies. That's usually, if you haven't learned that yet, just there you go. I have a tip jar in the back if you want to thank me later. But the idea behind this, now, they're reproducing like crazy. The question in this is, well, who are the sons of God? And maybe you sat in a Bible study before, or you listened to a podcast, and you maybe have a different idea for this. So I just want to encourage us this morning to enter into the text with humility. Now, I entered in this text, and I get frustrated when I can't figure something out. I kind of like black and whites. I like things that, okay, yes or no. This whole gray thing, yellow light, kind of weird in the middle, not green or red. That stuff bothers me. Maybe it bothers you as well. But I enter this text with humility. And there's no reason whatsoever we should have division in a church over the next 4 verses when it comes to interpretation of this. Because I think the overall picture of what God is trying to say is the most important part. But now, in the details, we're trying to figure out, well, who were the sons of God? Moses, what are you talking about here when you write this down? I'm going to give you an idea for 3 different theories that we have to give you a taste of perhaps what's going on in this passage. And there's some other theories, but these 3 here show you, I think, the top 3 that we have. So the number 1 is we have the Sethites, who married ungodly women. I'll explain what that means here in a second. Number 2, they were fallen angels who married women. So now we have this crossover. They come down, they've married these earthly women. Number 3, they were powerful human rulers who married women. Now, there's other theories, but these, I think, are the top 3 that kind of give a glimpse of where the rub is in this passage, because it's very confusing. So Sethites, so when Cain killed Abel, remember that, the first murder we had, Cain killed his brother. We learned at this point, too, that God has preferences when it comes to worship. God does not accept every sacrifice and every act of worship. Okay, God, you have preference. That's why when we bring him our offerings and our worship, it needs to be actually pleasing to him, not just pleasing to us. This is when Pastor Reese, he chooses his sets, the songs that we do. It's not just songs that you like. These are songs that need to be honorable to him and truthful. I want to make sure he receives that well. Well, also fallen angels, another idea. We see in Jude chapter 6, it tells us about the angels who did not keep their proper domain. They didn't keep their proper domain, but they left their own habitation. Jude, it goes on to say in chapter 7, to tell us that they sinned in a similar manner, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh. So we think maybe this is the context it's talking about with the sons of God. And here also in Genesis chapter 6, this might be a reference to what's going on, for example, with Sodom and Gomorrah. If you remember the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, there was unnatural sexual desire going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. And this crazy story that happened back then. But the point that I see in this passage, as we try to not get lost in some of the, I don't say weeds, but reeds, get lost in the reeds. The point really is that God takes marriage and marriage vows very serious. Very, very serious. Even in the New Testament, it's mentioned by the Apostle Paul, this whole concept of don't be unequally yoked with another, with an unbeliever. Now, you can take that in a business context. Don't have a tight business relationship with someone else who's not a believer. Usually, we use that context in marriage, because in marriage, that is a very tight union. And Paul is very clear that that union is supposed to be if you are a believer with someone else who has the exact same worldview as you. Because if it's not the same worldview, you have a constant rub. If they're a believer and if you're not, and it's just constantly against everything. Because that lens of how you see everything, that worldview, affects all of your decisions. That's why it's important to marry someone who is a believer. Well, many people say, too, that God whispers about sexual sin. Maybe you've heard that before. Well, we're supposed to amplify the things that God is yelling about, but he seems to be like he's really quiet about sexual sin. Well, friends, when I even look at the story this last week of Sodom and Gomorrah, raining hot sulfur on a village because of sexual sin, I don't call that a whisper. I think God has a lot to say about sexuality. And this culture now is we can't figure out basic things, and there's this massive confusion that we have created as the world is literally looking at the United States, pretty much laughing as we can't figure out basic biological things. They're laughing at us. Well, God does not whisper about sexual sin. But God is showing us that the fall of the once godly and the justification of future destruction is coming. I think that's what he's trying to paint in this passage. Things are bad, we're having unions that are bad, and now this is going to justify that at some point God is just going to say enough is enough. We're going to wipe out the face of the earth. Verse 3 says this, "Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. Now, this is an interesting passage because in this section here, there's many different interpretations, but I really think what he's trying to say in this, when he labels 120 years, this is a timeline to the buildup of the flood. So it's not some sort of cap on the length of years now with man, because we know that they were living crazy lengths back then. Sometimes I used to read the Bible like this. I'm like, this Methuselah guy, like 969 years, like, what? How did his spine even work? Did he have a spine? Like, if he didn't trim his fingernails, they're like curled for like a whole mile. Like, that is so old. Well, then you start thinking, well, hold on. Let's think about this. The gene pool's not really contaminated. We didn't have a lot of the issues, greenhouse gases, and the pollutions that we have today. And God and how he works, I do think that there's more longevity in life back then. Now, enter into the scene. This passage here, verse 4, this is where things get really weird. This is where we have bizarre creatures. I was going to put some pictures on the screen, but I want you to sleep tonight, so I'm not going to show you those pictures. Verse 4 says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans, and they had children by them. They were the heroes of old. They were men of renown. So who in the world are the Nephilims? If you Google this, you get some bizarre pictures. Very twisted imagery. These giant creatures with tails or weird extra digits, and it's like, what is going on? This isn't Revelation, God. This isn't Genesis. What's going on here? Well, really, I want to give you an idea of where I really think that they're aiming towards in the text. They were a race of giants and superheroes who did acts of evil. Acts of evil. Their massive size and power likely came from the mixture of some sort of demonic DNA with human genetics to make some sort of superhuman mixed hybrid race, I think is what is going on here. Now, okay, some of you survived the 1960s. And I've heard stories. I wasn't around. I wasn't even a twinkle in somebody's eye at that point. But I have heard stories about the kind of complete moral decay and how things were just really messed up then. Sometimes I think, well, this is our times. Yes, we have issues. If you look at the news, we have issues, but I look at this and I'm reading back then, I'm thinking, wow, I'm not sure I'd want to walk outside with these guys walking around. No, I would stay inside. There was a whole different evil going on back then. Well, friends, also I want to remind you that Adolf Hitler in the late 1930s, early 1940s, he was not the first one who tried to create a superhuman race. It goes much further back than Adolf Hitler. And yes, the whole globe was looking on Germany to see if this little Austrian guy with a weird mustache, what he was doing. And luckily, thank God, most of the globe said, no, we are against this. And we fought against this, right? But now, it's almost frightening to realize that genetic scientists are seriously working to create the master humans today. While abortions can be used to systematically eliminate the undesirable. But it's quiet. It's very quiet. Okay, if this, I remember even with Bill Nye, the science guy, maybe some of you grew up watching him. I watched a documentary with good old Bill Nye. He was my hero when I was a little kid. I was all about science, and he's doing Nirvana music videos. I'm like, this is my guy. He's a guy from the Northwest. That was my thing. I remember Bill Nye, and I remember years ago I watched this documentary about Bill Nye, and he was saying how he never wants to have kids because he had some sort of genetic issue that he knew he would probably pass on to his kids and contaminate the gene pool of civilization. I'm like, whoa. I remember pausing the documentary. I'm like, I was all alone, but I'm looking around the room. No one's here to share this moment with me. Just, people, anyone, if you saw that, did you realize what he just said? If something is not perfect, they shouldn't be born. I find that very frightening because every one of you has issues and you were born. Praise God. Your parents said yes to you to be born with all of our issues that we have. So now, way back in Genesis, that was not the first time. So another question is here, was Satan trying to infiltrate his seed to thwart the line of the Messiah? Was he trying to creep in and have this fallen angelic procreation with these women, trying to get his seed in because he knew at some point through the genealogy of Abel going through in the future that somehow, some way, going through this now, the line of Seth, if we get to this point, okay, now Messiah is going to come. Well, that's his adversary. That's the one who's against him. What if he could thwart this and come in and stop this by reproducing, but taking those who are godly and changing and doing all these weird morphisms? Well, friends, I don't really know. But it could be something he was trying to do. because Satan is creative, not to give him any credit today. Well, now, the Nephilim, they were one of the main reasons for the great flood in Noah's time. Imagine God the Creator watching all this happening. His art, his expression on a canvas, pure corruption all around him. Well, now, God's word says this in verse 5. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. All the time. Does that sound familiar to you? Living in Georgia in 2022 in the United States of America? Maybe some things have not changed so much today. Well, kids today are getting indoctrinated with so many different agendas. And not too many years ago, educators would permit certain things to happen. Now we're seeing a shift where they're now promoting certain things to happen. And sitting down with our oldest this last time, it was about 2 weeks ago, sitting down with her, and she had questions about some moral issues with classmates and their parents and things they're going through. And she was shocked by things she's hearing, and her heart was disturbed. And I was sitting there talking about these very adult things with a little girl in my eyes. I'm like, wow, they're growing up so much quicker than I realize. As you realize with your kids, you're addressing some issues you thought you wouldn't have to address for years, and you're talking about them now. We're talking about what's going on in her classroom, and I just said, hey, let me just show you a timeline, Zora. And I went back and just started showing some research what happened in the 60s when we tried so hard to get God out of public school. And so as they succeeded more in getting God out, getting God out more of school. And then at the same time, when you get God out, we started to see the increase of moral failure. And we wonder if there's a correlation. Well, I say yes, there's a correlation between those two things. You see this push, no, we don't need it, but okay, why is everything falling apart and all these issues that's going on? She's talking about classmates and their parents, and it's just, I think there's a direct correlation. I read this last week in Matthew 18. When I think about kids in the next generation, it's so fun to see 4 up here today who took this challenge serious. And I do say we have nothing to fear about the next generation, but as shepherds and those who are called to guard truth, to be guardians, and to protect. I read this in Matthew 18. God brought this to my mind. It says this. Jesus is talking. If anyone causes one of these little ones those who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Don't mess with kids. Now, if you're a Jesus follower, the calling is clear. We need to preach truth to these kids. We need to shepherd our kids. And it's tough in this culture now because we're fighting this massive battle all the time. It says this in 2 Timothy. Paul says this. He says, but mark this. He's talking about now the last days, talking to his little intern, Timothy. But mark this. There will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves. They will be lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, cancel culture, insert that here, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of good. They hate good. They love everything that's against good. It's backwards in society. Treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. This last line, this isn't on the screen, but this is crucial when Paul says this. They will have a form of godliness. Now I see this often with a lot of people say, okay, they are a little bit spiritual. I'm going to grab a little bit from this religion, that religion, and kind of make up my own tossed salad of beliefs. Try a little bit because, friends, the enemy is creative. He will use religion and spiritual things to try to hook you and try to get you just into these little degrees of turn over time, get you a little bit away from Jesus and truth and these things, just kind of spiritual things. And over time, if this happens every week, you get to the point you're completely off course with your foundation in Christ. And that's his goal. His goal is to destroy you, but in little increments. That's how he can do it. Now, in verse 6, it says this, This is the frustrated artist. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. God was sad. God has emotions. He was sad. He was disappointed. His creations, they want to live a life independent of him. He gave them life, but they don't want to give any recognition to him for the life. So God, my friends, he's not some sort of robot. He wants you to have a relationship with him. He wants you to have this communion, this conversation with him. He is pained by the sinner's rebellion. Inside of this is so much theology. Does God regret things? He knew this is going to happen. Was he surprised? You can't be surprised if you knew something's going to happen. He's sovereign, so he's all controlling. He's omniscient. He's all knowing what's going on. But in this, I was just thinking about, often we just can't answer questions. And I think that's a good thing for us. I think it's healthy as we worship an infinite God in every direction. We have to recognize we're finite. We don't know everything. When I was 24 years old, I'll never forget, in the hallways at a church in Oregon, church I grew up in, I was serving in the church as an intern, knew nothing, serving in this church, and our sound guy committed suicide. He went out to a field with a shotgun and he ended his life. And our church was rocked in that moment because he left these two little boys behind, and I was ticked off. I was more angry than sad at that moment. As these two little adorable boys are now trying to navigate the rest of their life, trying to figure out how to do life. Hallways that coming Sunday. Harry was trying to study theology at 24. I thought I knew a lot. His dad, so the one who committed suicide, his dad walked up to me, cornered me in this hallway. He put his finger in my chest. He said, Mark, how does this play into the sovereignty of God? He pushed his finger into my chest. I'll be honest, I didn't know what the word sovereignty meant. I'd never heard it before. I just remember feeling hot and uncomfortable. This is a dad. His face was beet red. His veins were showing on his neck. But he looked at me as the one studying theology. I was supposed to have the answers. And I had nothing. I said, I don't know. And I can tell it was rhetorical. He didn't need an answer. He was a sad, broken father trying to find something to grasp in this world as his world had been broken. We don't have all the answers, and that's okay. We still are people full of faith, and we move forward in trying to understand what we can about God. But often we can't answer the questions. Well, friends, the world is falling apart right on schedule. So what can we do as Jesus people here in Mableton, Georgia? What can we do? And this is the last verse, and I love this verse because I know a lot of this is dark, or this is like all of a sudden little halogen light kind of peers in. You get a glimpse of hope. But, I love this in verse 8, But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. How does God view you? As he looks at you and examines your life, how does he view you? Does he find favor in you? Do you find favor in him as you look at him? Hopefully it's a two-way glance. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And all the corruption, there was one there. There was one who was righteous. Noah means rest. Noah means rest. I really think that this now is a glimpse of God's grace. Sometimes we just look at the New Testament as this grace age and this outpouring of grace. Well, there's a lot of grace in the Old Testament. If you think about God and his being a just God, how he can't be around sin, to think of all the messed up corruption all around him, I'm sure even in the heart of a sinner like Noah, to say, okay, I'm going to still extend grace to this guy. So grace is in the Old Testament. Well, friends, as you walk into a room, do you light that room up? Are you being salt and light in that room? When you type that email, are you being the salt and the light to the world? Because friends, our world now, they need Noah more than ever. They need you to be a Noah. Be the Noah that the world needs, my friends. This is our time to be the Noah. Well, Satan is still active today. And so often we focus on all these things that are visible, these things that are material. We have all these issues. We're trying to look at skin color, and we think if we can reduce some other skin color and lift up another one, somehow that is just, and somehow that's equality. And we try to judge all these things and how people look. And I look at these issues, and I'm like, Christ followers are called to fight the immaterial. We're called to fight against the supernatural. We look beyond things on the surface. There's a bigger thing going on with your soul. Doesn't matter how you look. And that's what we're called to as believers. And now I'm thinking about, well, Satan is his creativity and what he does, and he's often trying to thwart us and mess us up. But I do believe today that he still can use religion. Maybe some of you have been trapped in trying to do certain things to gain your salvation. Or maybe you've joined into some other spiritual thinking that is somehow taking you away from the core principles of Christianity. He still is creative today. I talked about the Hillsong documentary we watched a few weeks ago. I didn't watch all of it. I watched 10 minutes, and that was enough. But enough to see how the enemy can creep in just to try to take key leaders and try to aim people a little bit different direction. Take something and water it down so it's more neutral, and do a little bit of this and get some more dynamic people. That we kind of watered things down, and then we wonder why people are biblically illiterate, and then we see the fall from the church and of the church from there. That's how he works. Friends, how you can thwart evil today. The faithful are called to pray. That's the number one thing we should be doing. If you put your faith in Jesus Christ, you should be called to pray, and pray often. Battle in prayer as much as you can. Pray. The other thing is show people the open door to Jesus. As you have that coworker and that family member is talking about all these options that they go through, remind them, and this is the same for you, as you're thinking about these doors in life, don't forget the door. His name is Jesus. And there are so many people around us who have never knocked on that door to receive Christ. And that is the most important door. And we have, so many of you have amazing testimonies. And we're going to highlight certain people in On Mission Church who have their moment when they walk through the open door and they met Jesus. They had a born-again moment. And friends, this morning, I want to show you a video of a friend of mine. He's on our Wise Council. His name is John Prince. And this is his story of walking through the open door.
I'm John Prince. I entered the open door of Jesus Christ when I was about 19. But before that, I was raised in a church, in a denomination that just seems to think themselves too intellectual to believe in Jesus, too smart to believe in the Scriptures. And I was thoroughly evolutionist to the core. Now, I was not an intellectual myself, but I appreciated intellectualism. Well, I went away to college, and I continued my pure ways. I didn't drink, didn't smoke. I was clean on the outside, but on the inside, I was dead. After my first year of college, I remember Beth telling us, Mark and David's dad, who had been our high school history teacher, is going back into active ministry. And I thought, well, I haven't gone to church in ages. So we all went to Mr. Cushman's church up on Lookout Mountain. And I was in for a surprise. This intellectual, he had a reputation for being a scholar, and we all knew that. This man was preaching Jesus and getting excited about Jesus Christ and affirming the reality of the Scriptures. I thought, I've got two options. I went to the church all summer, every Sunday, and I thought, I've got one thing that I can do. I can't do both. I can either say, Mr. Cushman, you're wrong. I will continue in my evolutionist ways, my humanistic ways. Or I can throw away my philosophy of life and say, no, Jesus is right. The Scriptures are right. Mr. Cushman, you're right. Well, I didn't resolve that at that point. But a friend in college, when I got back to my sophomore year, handed me a tract. And she said, John, this is your life. You're on the throne of your life. This is the life you need to be leading, Jesus on the throne. I didn't tell her, but I agreed with her. And so I went home that night and I prayed to receive Christ. I did it the next night too, and I think the next night. I didn't realize Jesus would listen the first time. I didn't know if I should feel some euphoria or what, but I remember wondering, am I really a Christian? I remember sitting in Lamar's room with a couple other guys, and Lamar playing his guitar, real good on the guitar. He said, yeah, we got all types. We got Jerome the pothead, we got me, the musician, and John, the Jesus freak. I had no idea anyone knew anything that I had become a Christian or received Jesus as Lord. And since then, the Lord has proven himself faithful, and after 68 years, the Lord is sweeter now than he ever has been. I am John Prince, and I found
the open door. John, thank you so much. Well, friends, that's what it's all about right there. I just want to give you the invitation, friends. If you have never received Christ, if you've never knocked on that door to receive him, I'll be in the back. I'd love to pray for you. We'll have some prayer team members. If you need prayer for anything, please head to the back as the band plays. We'd love to pray for you for what you're going through. But friends, let me pray for us now. Well, Jesus, thank you so much for being the door. And we're called to knock, and you will open that door, God. So thank you so much for this truth, God. And this is a very complicated passage, but I do understand you're showing the wickedness of this world, God, and not much has changed today. And so thank you for the grace that you pour out on us as we deserve wrath. We deserve punishment big time. But for those who believe in you, you've saved us with your grace. We will live forever in eternity with you in heaven. And Jesus, if there's anyone here who's never gone through the open door, have this be their morning, they can say yes to you and receive you as Lord. And Jesus, I pray this in your name. Amen.